So I can't really make the same, like, absent parental figure joke twice in a row, so I think I'm going to pull a Philly D instead and just offer physical violence instead, so I'm in your room. Either way, welcome back, everybody. Today, we are ourselves some lovely, brand new information. And by brand new, I mean probably 2 weeks old at this point, because holy crap, am I busy nowadays. I do not intend to be as tardy and busy as I am, but holy shenanigans. After 10 hours a day, I'm tired. I don't feel like sitting here and doing this. Plus, I've been heavily distracted with a lot of new games. That Steam Storm Mail, baby. Oh boy, that shenanigans real good. But either way, we got ourselves 2 news posts here about some co-drivers, some chase news. Plus, we actually have the little PTR to actually showcase here as well. But that'll be at the very end. This is going to be another long video, but you know what? You guys love this shenanigans for whatever reason. So first things first, new amusement rides for the range. Kind of weird to call them rides out of all things. It's more of a technical thing. They're actually just going ahead and be like damage taken little items here. So you have the machine gun and you have a sort of rocket-esque turret here. But these things don't actually kill other things on the range inside your garage. These actually damage yourself when you activate them. So in a way, it's actually able for you to test damage being taken upon yourself. Previously, the only way that you could kind of do this is with the NPCs that you could spawn in and do damage to yourself. But it's not really necessarily a super consistent and easily replicatable way to actually showcase damage done to yourself, especially considering they were only using something like the core builds to really do that. So this is going to be something that gives you a little bit more consistent of a DPS check here. Not only to check for things like skirt armors and linchpins within your build, but definitely able to test the actual durability and perks of the vehicle itself. So very nice to go ahead and try off here. Beyond that, they also have some nice, lovely co-driver changes here, which I think I could read again. But considering that for the most time, most of these changes are going to be subject to change prior to them even being launched, it's not necessarily too important to read into it for a super whole detail and much, because literally next thing I know, next news post I could read, it could all be changed here. But for example here, essentially instead of just being a flat value of a couple 100 kilograms, it's now actually based on your total car's mass. So in that regard, that's kind of how that mass limit bonus works. And they also kind of explain here, too, that co-drivers themselves are going to have more specialized roles for the most part. They want to actually have a co-driver for, I don't want to say every weapon category, but for similar most play styles. Because in that regard, they want to make it so that your co-driver actually has an impact towards a build. Although I'm actually curious if they're going to go for like any sort of like hybrid-esque build, where it's going to be able to utilize and benefit all weapons, or if that's more or less going to be reserved for something like tanking, which in general increases your survivability, and in general is then able to increase your combat effectiveness. So maybe in that regard, maybe the tanking one kind of fulfills that hybrid role, but it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. And then beyond that, they also have their new sort of like name for the currency that you acquire to actually unlock the co-drivers, and they're still sticking with the same thing where it's going to be level 30, you unlock it, and there you go. Now you actually have the ability to go ahead and start earning points towards this. Plus, if you already have all the co-drivers maxed out, they essentially say, okay, well, then you have all the co-drivers unlocked in this system. So for anyone who hasn't reached level 30 or hasn't maxed out their co-drivers, you're still going to have to do a little bit of grinding here. But hey, at least you didn't have to waste any resources associated with it, because they will not compensate you at all in terms of coinage value for these lost resources, still only giving you this intel or honor or whatever they're going to call it in the end. And again, still keeping it level 30, which not really ideal in my books, but as long as I can find a way to balance around that, I'm not going to be too picky about that. But considering there isn't any sort of power score differentiation in that system, still not ideal. It's going to further exacerbate seal clubbing to the nth degree. And while it's already been pretty bad and a pretty big annoyance for a lot of players to begin with, this is going to seem more just like an impedance on top of that. Because the thing is that you really don't want the skill ceiling to be more dictated by how much time you put into it per se. You want it to be more based on your actual personal skill and your effectiveness within building and utilizing a car, as opposed to some type of system that is not accessible to early game players. Now, I understand you don't want to like hyper load and front load the entire game so people still have anything to unlock in the very end, but you still have the ability to grind out these characters throughout the whole time. So why can't they grind out from 0 to 30? Especially considering you'll still be playing a significant amount of this game. It just seems like a way to further increase the time that you're within this game, or to incentivize the purchase of things like premium time or packs. Either way, not a big fan of the level lock to that, but I'm not the developers. I'm not the upper management who make these decisions. So don't yell at me. Beyond that, they also have a couple of changes here with regards to armor parts here. Feel free to look at your own leisure, but I mean, it's changes. It's changes. Now, but beyond that, they also look like they're changing crossbows in general. So this includes things like Spike, Toadfish, and Phoenix, overall making them smaller, which I appreciate considering these models are incredibly large and not very high damage. So it's definitely good they're getting rid of this, because in a sense, it's kind of like a really crappy sniping weapon that doesn't have a huge amount of utilization on the battlefield. So definitely a good thing about that. Beyond that, we still have these, I think we talked about this last video, but just the cabin changes to the master cabin, changing it essentially from a medium cabin to a heavy cabin here. But essentially, they increase all of its stats to make it slower and heavier, but compensate by giving you essentially more durability and able to do things with that, which is definitely more beneficial towards a cabin designed to be hit as opposed to a fast-weight cabin, which didn't really seem to line up properly. Beyond that, they've also modified the disc gripper here, so essentially instead of it being a turreted weapon, it is now a full 360 with increase in durability, mass, but also having extra impulse, which means how much, to flip a car or push a car, reload time and rotation speed increase, and it increases the time they're actually stuck in the ground and on objects, so actually able to impact things like movement, as well as actually increasing damage. By how much? Who knows? Beyond that, the drone vultures appear to actually just be basically the same now, but they also have changed something to the Astrias, increasing the projectile size by 75%, and by increase, I mean decrease. So the physical size of the projectile has been reduced by 75%, making it much smaller, and probably unlikely to interact with much more say armor parts, making it more of a sniping weapon, which probably useful for some people if you're into that sniping thing. Although to be fair, if you're on console and you're still utilizing snipers, good luck, my dudes. Beyond that, we also here have some changes and some announcements of the chase mode and co-drivers here. They really seem to be heavily modifying the co-drivers here, so that's why I'm not really going over it in great detail, because that's just going to be something that is going to be highly variable and subject to a lot of change. Especially when implementing a system this grand and this robust, there's definitely going to be some situations in which something's going to have to either be reworked or massively nerfed, just to account for balance changes, like that Tank Man perk that almost activated 24/7. So essentially, they got a couple information here about the chase mode. The map itself is going to be called the Warrior's Path, which actually was showcased a little bit here on the live, so we can probably go over that here real quickly, but you can kind of see here, we got ourselves two very large cars that are going to try to sit here and actually destroy. You see they've been completely redesigned from the previous cars here and have a much more of a customized model here, which honestly I think looks really, really freaking badass. Honestly, I wouldn't mind have like what would essentially be the opposite of a chase mode on a car like this, because these things look really, really cool. Love the look of this mode, and it's essentially the old chase mode here, except with modified builds. So, plus they have their own little custom map that fits with the theme of the season, which seems to be more of like a Syndicate-esque theme season. So definitely very, very, very nicely looking here. But if it's basically the old chase mode, but they also do want to point out that the route they're going to be taking every time is going to be different because there's different variations, which I heavily appreciate. But you still have the same thing where there's turrets and NPCs trying to kill you while the truck themselves are also trying to kill you. So it's definitely heavily incentivizing a mode where you're definitely able to pick out a lot of people while also picking out the truck itself. They also mentioned that you can actually complete this mission at a halfway point. So if you're able to destroy one of the vehicles as opposed to both of the vehicles, you get half the rewards as opposed to the full fat rewards. So interesting on that, my guess is you're probably going to need to get those full rewards to even make anything worth it, because a lot of these modes, even the 2/3 rewards modes that you get from things like, was it War for Fire or something like that, those do not really offer that much of a competitive advantage in terms of time and money savings, as opposed to just doing straight up PvP missions or those frontier defense ones. So instead of here, they got some minor balance changes to the co-drivers. Go ahead and look at it at your own leisure. Like I said, these are likely to change, so wouldn't get too attached to these. Beyond that, some more balance changes here. The Accelerator Scorpion damage reduced by 10% here, which I could definitely see. There was a lot of heavy perks in there that heavily incentivize sniping. So when you throw it with a heavily high damage weapon here, you're definitely going to need to reduce something here, because otherwise Scorpions are going to be fantastic at chunking off some of those heavier cannons and higher power score battles. Like when you're dealing with Typhoons, Tsunamis, and other massive weapons, and then you throw a Scorpion on there that's able to do 500, 600 damage a hit, yeah, you're going to need to reduce that significantly to make this even remotely balanced. For some reason, they've also managed to reiterate that crossbows are changing yet again. I'm still wondering why they're puffing out all of these news pieces here, because the Scorpion thing is legitimately the one thing new, and the balance changes on co-drivers and the chase mode. These are all new information here, but this crossbow, the Master Cabin, the Ripper, the Vulture, the Astrius, that is all repeat news here. Are they running out of things to display? Like, I understand, like, them wanting to reiterate everything, but at the same time, unless you're going to modify the numbers and clearly display that, because I don't know, I'm not going to go back and, check these. But at the same time, if they're not, then why repost them? It just seems to be weirdly puffing it out. You already have a great season. No need to puff out these pieces anymore. If you want to make it short, make it short. That's fine. Don't waste my time. But I digress. Beyond that, here we got ourselves the nice, lovely live stream here that showcased really a lot of stuff here that seems quite interesting. But let me actually just go ahead and take you through the screenshots as opposed to every single individual item, because that'll take forever. So first things first, we got ourselves the first big chase section here, actually showcasing the first kind of sections here of what you can actually expect. Now, actually, the first item here was that nice, lovely will, as well as a little module that increases the innate scope on your car itself. So if you don't know, the base car itself does actually have a ye old, like 1.8x zoom scope on it, but with this module, you can actually increase it. This is called the Iris, by the way. It actually increases it to, I believe, a 6x zoom. So not that bad. So your first, 10 levels, you get a nice little wheel to mess around with. Then you have yourself a nice little optical sight here that actually makes it significantly farther seeing. So if you see on this car, instead of going the usual 1.8, now it's going to a 6x zoom, which is definitely a lot farther, more useful for sniping builds, while also decreasing the energy use on your car. But still isn't important as the traditional scopes that can go much further. So if you're planning on going long distances, then those would still probably be ideal. Beyond that, we also have the usual customary cosmetic items, and they've started to introduce resource crates too, that actually do have a chance of getting things like uranium, which is kind of interesting. Beyond that, we have the Tempest here, which is a nice, lovely version of the already existing world, except a little bit slower, but very similar model size here, probably a little bit smaller, but still has that perk of actually dealing more damage. I should actually say, the perk is more or less just because it's able to fire at a consistent pace, but with less accuracy, while still having great damage and spread to it. So that's kind of more or less its perk. It's nice, consistent, and rapid fire. Doesn't really actually have that perk, but actually does increase damage based on proximity. Just wanted to clarify that. Still, though, quite a nice beefy autocannon compared to things like the rapiers that are still quite squishy. Although the Cyclone kind of makes up for that because it actually has a lot of similar attributes to that of the Whirlwind, except still more long-range oriented, while still having a nice beefy aura to it. Beyond that, more cosmetic and armor parts you can go ahead and utilize. Unfortunately, it's not as armor heavy as previous seasons, in which have 10, 20 pieces to that. They still actually have a lot less of that, which honestly I prefer. The fact that a lot of armor parts, for the things like the Founders, the Syndicate, and the other seasons actually had a lot of armor parts in them that were not accessible other than having to utilize engineer badges. That I'm all a big fan of. I hate utilizing engineer badges to purchase armor parts that I really should be in the base game itself, but are not for whatever intrinsic reason. Beyond that, we have the Milla here, the nice lovely autocannon minigun combination that's reminiscent of the Reaper, except much smaller, and still requires things like overheating capacity, so things like chillers and radiators to go ahead and help with that. Although it appears it doesn't actually have to do with any sort of ammunition this time, which is quite nice. That was one of the big concerns, where this gun was going to have ammunition and radiator cooling, but it looks like it's going to be more like a traditional minigun where it just needs radiators and the cooling. Plus, you still get that explosive damage after the 15th hit, which is always nice. Beyond that, we also have another one of these resource crates, but they do seem to actually scale up the ladder you get into the season, so you get a higher chance of getting more of these valuable resources, which, for those who actually buy into the season, that's going to give you a bit more of a value proposition with this. The only downside is, with the high proliferation of all these items, I'm still concerned about the economies of Crossout getting a substantial amount of inflation. We've actually seen a significant increase in prices of all commodities on the Crossout marketplace. Similar to, not as bad as something like the console marketplaces, where items are like, $10,000 for an epic item or something like that. Something absurd. Not as bad as those markets, but you're still getting that on PC with the proliferation of all of these seasons that give you hundreds of coins, that give you hundreds of dollars in resources and, you know, badges and all that, which is great for, you know, getting a value towards the season. But the downside, it also makes the economy not nearly as healthy with just a large amount of inflation. Now, that being said, do I want them to necessarily make the seasons less valuable? Not necessarily. I still prefer that model of making seasons exclusively cosmetics only, as opposed to making it a whole bunch of functional material. Functional material, I should not be behind all these timed gates. That's still my feature. That's still the thing I'm going to die on here. And yet, for some reason, Crossout is still like, oh no, we're going to love it. You're going to love it when all these factions and all these armor parts and all these guns are locked behind X, Y, or Z thing. No, either way, I digress. That's the crate! Beyond that, we got ourselves a CK Balan, which, if you've been paying attention to all the previous videos where I've gone over all the other details, you honestly know everything already in this season to begin with. You can already expect there's going to be coins, there's going to be decor items, there's going to be armor parts, there's going to be background, there's going to be stickers, there's going to be holograms. It's pretty standard fare for most seasons here, except it has more of a syndicate flair to it this time. Especially with that cool little trailer they launched recently that looks really just muy bien. So you can actually see here this nice little RP cabin here with that nice little perk on it. So definitely very interesting. Same thing with the extra cosmetics we got going on here. And then some more armor parts if you're big into those things that actually go ahead and protect, you know, the top and bottom of these vehicles to give it a bit more of a oomph and cushion to it. Although to be fair, since it's only really going up one elevation as opposed to 2 or 3 that other armor parts can offer, I'm not sure quite how much protective value there is unless you're utilizing something that has a very low profile to it. But definitely do like the CKs here for the small tracks. Definitely a very strong syndicate vibe here. It looks very, very nice. So I'm a big fan of all sorts of CKs here, but really the big thing of this season is this almost kind of uncharacteristic weapon, because the weapon they're showcasing here is an Avalanche, and this is not really a syndicate weapon here. This is like a big Steppenwolf or Scavenger, really more like a Scavenger faction here, because this is a big honking gun with a large bullet that drops off massively with a huge reload time, but huge damage potential too. I mean, a car like that is basically a cannon version of a shotgun. You walk up to somebody and they're not there anymore, is essentially what the gun's gonna do. So really cool to look at that, and it's got a nice cathartic like clunk to it. You just see the damage on that, and it's just, oh, pretty boy going oof. Look at that, doing nearly 1,200 damage a shot with that bad boy. Dang, son. Now, the downside is that it's heavy, it's going to take up the majority of the energy in your car, and you're going to have to build pretty much exclusively around that, and you're still going to have to get it into close range to order it effectively. So in that regard, it's still a high-risk, high-reward playstyle that is further enhanced by its survivability thanks to its high armor and high resistance innate to itself. So pair it with something like a Humpback or an Icebox or a Cohort for that damage resistance, maybe even a Master, you definitely have a beefy weapon here that can survive a lot of things. Another thing to know about this bad boy is that it has fairly significant drop-off. So if you're trying to utilize it at some distance here, you're not going to be able to utilize it at some distance here. You shoot it once, and you're probably going to be able to shoot within 100 meters. Try to go anything further than beyond that, and you're not going to hit it. But at least you got a nice beefy explosion radius, so as long as you hit close, you still do a decent amount of damage. Beyond that, we ourselves to the CK for the nice lovely Bastion cabin here. Definitely very jazzy looking here. Still a very staunch syndicate vibe here. Get a couple of work pieces, which you already know my thing about work pieces. Functional items behind a timed paywall. Wow, cool, thanks. But whatever, I gotta start being more positive, honestly, because you guys in the chat leaving paragraph, essay long tirades. Like, no, that's my job to do tirades. Like, you guys sit there and praise being the furries or whatever. We also got the Amori here. We talked about that previously, but essentially a shielding module for weapons or anything attached to it that if the shield is bursted, then it actually takes damage and may eventually fall off. So kind of a risk-reward weapon with this thing, but definitely very jazzy. Beyond that, we still get the standard stabilizers and blueprints here, which honestly, with the depreciation of value of coins and blueprints, it's actually ironically going to get less and less value-oriented as time goes on, just because of the relative decrease in value of these seasons. Especially even for consoles, like you guys probably get a massive dump of these things when that comes out, so it probably heavily reduces the price of these things. But hey, at least now we actually get to see this nice, lovely little rocket launcher here, which, just for a reminder, the perk is that you reload faster while moving. But the thing is that it essentially acts like a howitzer, but a very much more sharpshooting version where you have to aim better, and it does a lot more damage straight up. You can see it does a lot more right up front, especially when paired with something like the Harpy Cabin. It's able to really heavily utilize it. Although it's not able to be as much of a support area denial weapon like the Howitzer was, and honestly, for how much ground control actually take care of, it's really going to be limited usefulness on this, especially with how slow those rockets were going. You see how long it takes for them to actually connect to the ground. So unless you're like perfectly timing someone's attack there, you have much more higher requirement to actually be precise with these shots. If you miss with these shots, you're not going to have any area denial and you're not going to have any damage. So it's much more of a precision but higher reward if you're able to do that to a certain degree. Beyond that, we got nice little holographic hubcaps, which honestly I think it's kind of interesting. I do kind of like that design more or less than the traditional hubcaps, which honestly a lot of them look pretty dang trashy. So this one is at least kind of cool. It gives it a nice different theme here. Beyond that, more cool paints, and now we actually get a look at the combi cabin here, which is the one that actually takes off all the heating effects, drones that stick onto you, and things like that that actually debuff your car. So in that nice, it actually does give you that whole invulnerability and deactivates all of those for 5 seconds. So it's actually good. It gives you the immunity to it as well. It's been clarified. That's what a big concern with a cabin like this, where like if it's only a cleanse, then it's not really useful. But an immunity is a lot more useful. Although I'm actually still curious if you get the damage over time effect if you actually go inside the pool, just not the heating effect. So I'm kind of curious as to how that works out too. Like, are you immune to fire while using this thing? I don't think so, but at least you wouldn't get the heat up part where it makes the consecutive damage on it a lot more damaging. Beyond that, they also go ahead and showcase the turrets here that you can activate to go ahead and damage you, so great for damage testing. And then beyond that, the main CK, absolutely beautiful. Ah, love any sort of like futuristic weapon here that gives it almost like a plasma-esque vibe to it. Just, ooh, can always appreciate that. But then beyond that, that appears to be most of these things. Again, they also showcase most of the co-drivers here, but most of these co-drivers haven't been too touched since the last time I talked about in the previous video, so I'm not going to go over it here 1,000 times. I'll still link to this video down below if you want to go ahead and take a look at your own speed. But like I said, he goes over it in a lot more detail, so not really necessary for me. Not to mention, I've already gone over a lot of this detail, so... And not to mention, it's going to change when it actually goes into the full final patch here. So when it actually is released, I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and review it when it actually comes out. But that'll be for a later video. Beyond that, I want to take a look at the brand new map he's actually showcasing here right behind my head. You can see, honestly, it looks very similar to a lot of the other maps that have already existed. Honestly, I'm having a hard time actually differentiating this from... There's honestly a one map they showcased like almost half a year ago that looked very similar to this. That was for the Crossout Day event. And honestly, I can't tell the difference here at all. Looks great, has a lot more dodging potential, but if you're not terribly enthralled with another factory-styled map, then you get what you get. But honestly, I appreciate any extra maps that come into the rotation here, because the same like 7 maps we've had for years now definitely do get a bit fatiguing, so it is nice to actually see a bit more stylish and come into something like this. Now, if they can also incorporate this into PvE missions as well, that'll definitely be very nice. Those PvE missions need a lot more spice to be a lot more appetizing. And again, the same thing with the chase mode here. Them actually showcasing here with the 2 large cabins in a syndicate-style map that's exclusively the chase mode, which is a bit unusual, but hey, I appreciate any mode as opposed to reusing a convoy map, which... Who knows, this could actually be a reuse for the convoy map to make them a bit more dynamic. There's a lot of things you need with PvEs that you need a bit more dynamics when it comes to it. Because as it currently states, the only dynamics is based on how the cars actually react in the given battle. But even then, that's not really enough to actually make it sort of unique enough to engage the player base. So something like this where it actually changes up the route they go on could be a bit more engaging. I would like them to see add further variables to this to actually make it a lot more dynamic. For, you know, a change in reward or a change in difficulty, that's always heavily appreciated on something like this. Now, that being said, have they alleviated the concerns with just harvester vehicles coming in here and absolutely destroying these things without giving, you know, whatever about it? Then that could be a nice concern too, because previously it was very easy for cars like this to just be absolutely destroyed by double harvester builds. So hopefully they fixed that and you're actually able to do things now, or at least make the distribution of points a bit more equitable. But we'll see how that turns out. But that's pretty much everything from these little patch notes here and the video. So if you liked what you've seen today, feel free to leave what your comments down below, as well as leave a like and maybe even become a channel member too. Membership started at only $1, and it directly helps supporting me continue the will to actually try this out. But beyond that, let me know what you guys think about the brand new update. This should actually be coming out tomorrow on the 14th. So probably won't have the video up today, but who knows? I may surprise myself, and I may surprise you even. I want to thank you all again for watching. Yet again, that's Red Panda. I greatly appreciate you being around. Out of that, guys, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.